All right, welcome to this session on search behavior. We're going to be looking at different approaches to searching, and the way I'm going to try and run this session is that we'll start off with a fairly straightforward search, and as we go along, we'll add more problems. So I'll create more problems for myself, I'll worry about more things, and so the search behavior will get more and more complicated as we go along. So if you don't have a requirement for a very detailed search behavior in whatever project you're working on now, then you might not find the full session that useful. But if you are working on a project, like a project exam, for example, then it might be worth sticking around until the end. So this project that I have, I just need to clear some tabs here. I have a project set up here. It is using Bootstrap, and I'm using the social API, so I'll just open the docs there. So this is the same social API. It is the same version as everyone else. It's using the live endpoints. What I've done here is I'm not building out the full social media application. I'm just building out one aspect of it. So this is the post listing. I'm treating the post listing like an inbox. So I'm doing a little bit of client-side hackery to make this behave a bit more like an email application or like a sort of chat client. This is not a huge amount of work. So if you look through the files here, I'll try and make this bigger for you. So if you look through the files, you'll probably notice that I haven't got everything I need. I've just built the bare minimum needed for this session. So this is not a complete solution, and in particular, the login flow is really bad. So I don't want anyone to think that this this part of the code represents sort of something finished. I'm using, if I go to the auth UI code, I'm actually using alerts and I'm using prompt. So I'm not doing any validation on the password. I'm not doing any validation on the email. So it's a very quick and dirty way to get auth working, but I'm not concentrating on auth. So that's just to explain my choices there. This script is quite useful. I've started to recommend that students use this instead of, so the alternative would be like container.innerHTML equals nothing. So that's quite a common pattern that's used to clear an element of all of its child content, and it does work, and it's really nice to use because it's just one line. But as you start dealing with stuff like search behavior in particular, you might get into a situation where you start to feel that the app is getting slow, and oftentimes the reason it's getting slow is because this is running lots of times, and when you clear HTML in this way, it doesn't remove event listeners. So what can happen is that if you're searching and each time the user changes a letter in their search term, so for example, if I'm here and I search hello world, that's going to trigger a load of elements to be rendered here once we get to that part of the session. If I then delete one letter, it's going to cause all of these items to be re-rendered. And if there's an event listener, so for example, if you've set a click event listener on one of these items, every time you re-render this list and get rid of all of the previous entries in order to generate the new entries, those event listeners won't be cleared away. So that's just a utility. This does the same job as this. It clears the inner content of an element. The only difference here is that I've assigned it to the prototype of the HTML element. So you're not expected to know this or to be doing this in your code, and it is actually something that you should do a little bit carefully. But the benefit of this is that if you declare this in your code, you can then say document.body, just to use an example, clear, and you can access this function from any element. So it's very easy to use. I think that this is a small price to pay for being able to clear in one line in the same way that we like to do with inner HTML, except this is a little bit better for browser performance. So that's just a sidebar. That's really the only sort of unusual bit of code I've got here. The constants, I've got some strings and I have these functions, and all that these functions do is they combine the string and they return it as a URL. So fetch can take a URL. So we could like put the contents of this straight in here instead of putting a string in fetch. But we'll get there in a second. I'm not going to focus on the API code because everyone is going to do this slightly differently. I've done this slightly differently to the previous videos, just to sort of show that it doesn't have to be done one way. So if you look at the create code, I've got quite a minimalistic API function here. It's not doing anything tremendously unusual. Most of that stuff is being handled by event listeners. So for example, the create post, I've got a event listener here, which is called on new message. Maybe I should stick with the message theme the whole way through, but this is attached to a form, and this is doing all of the manipulation of data needed to send this in the right format. So I've tried to keep things simple on the API side. There's not a lot of UX going on here. You will see maybe that I've used classes to represent HTML templates. So I have post thumbnail and I also have this alert message. I'm going to look at the alert message rather than the post thumbnail just to show you how this is looking. So this is using DOM parser instead of in HTML. This format's probably going to be a little bit unusual or foreign to some of you, but this is one way to use classes. In this case, the template is kept as a string, and then when the element itself needs to be rendered, it is sent to DOM parser. But again, I'm doing a full session on this before the end of term, so I'm not going to go through this stuff in detail unless we have some extra time later on. The purpose of this session is not to look at API code particularly. It is to look at UX code. So the experience of searching. So this, I'll create some test data, and in fact, someone else can create test data whilst they are listening, because this list is populated by using the tag messages, or message, I think, if I check here. Yeah, message. So I'm going to pop that in the chat. Where's my chat window? Here. So if you create a post on the API now with that tag, it's going to show up in my inbox here. So at the moment, I'm not filtering for like messages to me. I'm just filtering for messages with that tag, and I'm doing that on the API. So I would appreciate if I don't have to waste your time submitting this form a bunch of times to create test data. Maybe I'm going to regret asking that when you start posting your examples, but if everyone can post one, that would be great. Then what we've got here is we've got the new post form. So if I look at the HTML here, this is a form, this whole element, and most of these match up with the APIs. So title and body are directly matching up with the API. And then just to keep things a little different here, I've got this recipient box here. So one of the things we're going to do in this session is populate this box. We're going to lazy load the data in. So at the moment you can see there's just placeholder data, but we will fetch the list of users from this endpoint here, profiles, and we will use that list of profiles to populate this list. I suspect it's going to be quite hard to manage because there are lots and lots of users on the API, but we'll cross that UX bridge when we arrive at it. And the idea behind the recipient is that that's going to be included as a tag. So when you're sending a message, let's go to the create function, no, the create listener. I was just working on this file before the session, so this one is not very well organized. So here you can see that every new message gets given the tag of message, and it also gets given the tag of @recipient. So for example, my username is Oliver, so that would translate to that string. And then what I'm going to do is look out for those tags. So I know my own username because that is stored in local storage. If I come over here, profile, so I know my own name, which is always a nice thing to be able to tell someone. And I can use that data here to filter on the API once this is all sort of hooked up correctly, so that I'm only receiving messages that have been sent to me. It's not exactly a foolproof system. Anyone who knows anything about how cell towers work isn't going to know that this is quickly going to run into an issue if this was a production application, because it would be very easy to intercept other people's messages. This is a totally insecure way of providing this functionality, but it's proof of concept, so I don't mind in this case. Right, so the tasks at hand, let's see if we've got any, no, still no test data. So the task at hand is going to be setting up a event listener for the search inbox input, and we will want to manipulate the data that is responsible for this array. So there's responsible for this list, sorry, which is an array. If I go to the network tab and refresh here and click on this request, let's see if we can make this a little nicer. No, how do I grab? Okay, I can't grab onto that. Not sure how big that's going to come through. So if I look at the preview of the response, which is being sent by this component here, I've got one item, which is the same as the list, so we're not going to be able to do much searching or filtering on a single item, but I can create a test item, let's say and then my recipient is still going to be a test recipient for now, but I can send this form and hopefully that's going to post. Didn't see the request fire, but that is the successful. I think I'm just missing a redirect or something to update the page. So when that create happens, there's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing to redirect the user. So what I can do is get the ID, which is 960. So that's going to be post .id, and I can redirect the user to, I've just sent a message, so I probably want to see that message, like a preview window here. So I've got the inbox path already, so maybe I want to redirect my user to inbox and view, maybe. I'm just making this up. I haven't actually planned exactly how the UX is going to work here. And we would need to include the ID in there. So we use a template string and put the ID. So, oh, and I forgot sorry. I'm going to do that again. ID equals, what was it? 960. So that's the correct format for the URL. And then I'm going to replace that hard-coded ID with the dynamic ID from this post object. This post object is being returned by the API. If we go and look at this, this is the function that's responsible for creating that item, and all we're really doing is returning the response from the request. Okay, so let's try that again with our new redirect. Hey, there we go. New redirect just dropped. Okay, so that worked, even though we've got HTML error and we've got a JavaScript error. That's not a problem because I haven't actually created this page, so I would expect an error in this situation. As for what that page should look like, for now I'm going to create it, and we call it view. So I'm going to call it viewIndex.html. I'm going to grab this code because that's going to be more or less what I want. The key difference is that instead of a form, in this case, we're going to have like a preview window. So let's call that preview. Well, it's not a preview, it's just a view, because a preview happens before you've done something, and this is after. So if we refresh now, we have the same, or we should have the same inbox. I'll get to that in a second. And we have just a blank page here. So that would be, we'd populate this with the title and the recipient and the body text of the message. As for why this is stuck loading, the reason it's stuck loading is because I have a switch in my code, and this is responsible for running or not running a function for a certain page. So here I've got the URL inbox view, and if I add this to this line, switch is very useful for this sort of thing, and I refresh, I've got, oh right, okay. So that I've got a new error, which is that I can't set an event listener on null, and that is because I just deleted a form. So I just did that and deleted the form, and now there's no more form for the code to detect. I'm actually okay with that. I'm just going to add a little clause to what am I going to do? I'm going to say new message form. So I wrote this in a quick way. I'm going to refactor it slightly to make it a bit more robust. So the problem is there's no form here, and I'm trying to set an event listener. So I'm going to try and access that form first, and then if there's a form, then I will continue with setting the listener. And if there's not a form, then nothing happens at all. So there's no problem. And if I clear my console, I've got rid of all my errors, and I've got my posts, and I've got a blank page. So we at least have some functionality here, and I'm just looking at the links I've got on the items, which go to a slightly different place. So what I'm going to do is change that. So if I click on these, it goes to inbox/message, and I actually prefer that to inbox/view. So I'm going to quickly go back over what I've done and change view to message. And is that the only place? No, it's not. I need to change it here too. Okay, so and I need to change the name of the folder. This is the nice thing about using the indexed HTML and folder name pattern to create your URL path, is that when you decide that you want to change it, you're really just changing a folder name, and you don't have to bother changing the index file. Maybe that's not such a big saving, but to me that makes life easier. So here I can change this to message, and all we've done is changed our routing behavior to make these two things the same. So if I create a new message and submit that, I should now come through to the same path as if I click on a message here. Although, yeah, so the only thing that's changing is the ID value. All right, I think I'll just add, I'm not gonna bother adding a template here because we don't really need it. We just need to be able to search this list. So I'm just going to go back to the default inbox view, and we can get started with some searching. We've got a nice group of posts here. Okay, so if we look at the structure I've got already, and again, this is not necessarily the perfect structure, this is just how I like to approach this task. We've got UI, and that's controlling pretty much anything that the user is interacting with. So any forms, any sort of button code, templates, things that need to be rendered, things that need to have event listeners set to them. That's all contained in UI. Tools is not really being used, and API is for all of my remote fetch code. So it makes sense that the majority of the work we're going to do is going to be in the UI folder. We will see, or we will look at implementing a search spool. So spool, S-P-O-O-L, is something you use to wind up wool or string. And we can use a spool to wind up API responses in the same way. So if we're searching, we can improve our search results over time. If, for example, the user searches for like apples, and they search apples here, and they wait for 30 seconds, 30 seconds might be long enough for the API to, or for the app to go and grab 300 results or 400 results and search all of those instead of just searching for the results in a group of 100. So we will get to some API stuff later on, but that's not the focus. Most of our work is going to be around events. Okay, so let's get going. I'm going to close all of these pages that are getting in the way, and we are going to create a new folder so that you might be able to do this in one file, but since we're going to be experimenting with a few different approaches, I'm going to keep this in a folder so that we can have the different approaches in different files, if that makes sense. So to start off with, I'm just going to work in the index file, and then we can add extra files to this later on. So the first thing we're going to need is this search element. It's got an ID, and it's within a form that also has an ID. So that's probably the best thing to look for, because we can bind to the submit event for this form instead of, well, there's actually no button. So we could add a button and do like a sort of traditional submit. Maybe I'll start with that because I think that's the most straightforward way to start. So in our search form here, I'm just going to add a button. Am I going to do this in the right place? No, that's not the right place. Here we go. So I'll just add a plain button with a bootstrap class to make it look nice. Am I on the wrong page? Didn't save. There we go. And it doesn't look very nice, so just going to make that flex, and then we will there we go. Good enough. I'm not going to keep the button for the whole session, so this is just meant to illustrate the simplest possible version of this. So instead of listening for a click event on the button, it's better to listen for a submit event on the form, because the form contains all of this stuff. So any information we were going to get from here, or any information we were going to get from here, we can always get that from the parent element. So it makes sense to place an event listener sort of higher up in the hierarchy sometimes, because that captures more data. So if we have a form, I like to bind to submit. The nice thing about binding to submit is that you get validation behavior for free, and you also get the enter key for free. So I'll demonstrate that in a second. So we are going to start by grabbing, I'll write it just sort of like at the root scope to show the simplest way to start, and then refactor back into a function afterwards. So we need our search form, and that's going to be a form with the ID of search. And we're going to attach an event listener, which is a submit type event listener. And we have an opportunity here to write a function. And in fact, let's go and check this and put a required tag in here maybe. And perhaps we want to set a minimum length of 3 characters. So I can't just search for like a single letter, because that's probably going to give me too many results, but I can search for 3 letters. Okay, so we have our event, and the target of that event is a form, because we are attaching the event listener to a form. The submit element, the submit event is triggered by the form element, or is it's triggered from that point rather than from the button. And this form, we can quite easily get our search term. There's lots of different ways to do this. You could, I think I just called it search. Let's check what I said in the name value. It actually doesn't have a name. Okay, let's give it a name. So name is useful for making inputs easier to find. And we can call this term, I think, like search term. So this is now going to be form.turn.value. Every time you add a name to an input, it will create this little alias for you. So it creates an easy way to access that input element. And here we are only interested in the value. So at this point, we can log the search term just to make sure that everything is going fine. And this is not going to work exactly how we want, but I will demonstrate anyway. So now if we search for tests, we get a page refresh. And not only do we get a page refresh, but we have had our URL be updated with our input. This is default form behavior. This is what a form is sort of for originally, is encoding user values into a URL so that that URL can be sent to a server and the data can be responded to. That's what we had at our disposal before Ajax was introduced, before Fetch. If you wanted to send data to a server, you would usually do it with a standard form submission. And that was also in the days before SSL, i.e. HTTPS. So all of these requests were flying around the internet unsecure and non-encrypted, which is a little bit terrifying to think back on, but it was the early days. So we don't really, we could use this data up here, but we don't want, for the sake of user interaction, we don't really want to refresh the user. So we can add this line at the start of the function, event.prevent default. And what this does is it stops the standard behavior for the event. So every event's a little bit different. A submit event will trigger a default URL update. So this function will prevent that default URL update, i.e. when we submit the form, we will not be redirected. Okay, that did not work. I don't have a console error. Oh, I'm not loading this file, so I haven't. If I drop this in here, then we will have some success. There we go. So just to show you it does work, we have that there, but this code is not portable. So it's not very useful in the context of a modular project because we want to be able to export this behavior and import it somewhere else where we can set it at the right time. So to fix that, I'm going to export a function and we will call this search, or setup search is probably going to be a better name because it's not the actual searching that we're doing here, it's the getting the element that we need to listen to and setting the event listener, and then only when that event listener fires, that's when we need to be searching. So the searching is going to happen here. Up until this point, we're just getting things ready. So I need to import that to my main code. You can see my main function here is called app. So this is the sort of top level. This is the entry point for the application. And if this function doesn't run, nothing is going to happen. So I want to be setting this search event listener, and I only want to be setting it when I have this inbox view. So I could put it here like that, but that's not going to necessarily be what I desire because there might be pages like a login page where it doesn't make sense to be searching or even trying to search. So instead of putting it in the sort of main app code, I already have this little switch here, and that switch is looking at the URL of the browser, and it is running certain code if the URL matches a certain pattern. There are other ways to do this, but I'm going to stick with this way. And in the case of the file, the page we're on now, which is in inbox, that's covered by this function. So I think we can safely put this listener here. Okay, that looks fine. The import was generated for me by VS Code IntelliSense, which is very helpful. Locating these imports can be tricky, and it is often best to let the tool do it for you instead of paging through all of your files. I will just show you a trick though. If you are not sure where to go next, Command I think it's probably going to be Control I for a Windows user. Command I will give you some options on what the next file could be. So that can be very useful if you are not 100% sure what this import URL should be. You can look up, so you can sort of walk up the tree and then walk back down the tree. And I find that Command I very helpful for doing that. Okay, so we've got the setup search function running in our inbox view, which means that if I clear and reload, we should be able to test it. It is working as far as we have set it up so far, and we're ready to filter. Okay, so there's a bit of like theory here. We know that we need to filter a list, and then once we've filtered that list, we need to update the HTML to show the change that's taken place. But exactly what we filter, what our criteria are for filtering, is not going to be the same for every single student or every single developer. So it might be that it's very important to filter based on tags, or it might be that it's very important to filter based on the title or the username. But everyone's app is going to be slightly different. So how you are managing your own behavior is your business. The simplest way to start is by filtering on the title. So that would, roughly speaking, look like posts.filter post, and then we'd say post.title includes term, something like that. That's enough. That's enough to perform a very, very simple search operation. But if we look at this code here, I'm not going to save it or try to run it, because if I do that, it's just going to create an error. The error is that I don't actually have this list of posts to hand. So I need to have some sort of way to access these posts at this point in time. And there's really two ways around here. So we could add posts as an argument for this function. And if we look at this inbox view page, in fact, that's not the right place for it to be. Inbox sidebar, here we go. So the sidebar is responsible for all of the fetching and rendering here. So that is probably the place to put it. And we can see here that we have our posts available, our list of posts, when we are busy setting up the sidebar. So we could include those there. And this means that when we are setting up the function here, we have a list of posts and we can filter them. That's one way to go. The other way to go would be using a callback. So when you are setting up this search, you could write a function in here and say search term, and do things that way around. I'm not going to go into that because I think it's better to do it the first way. Things get a little confusing if you are using too many callbacks. So I'm going to stick with this. I'm getting my post list from the API. I'm then passing that to the search function, and then rendering the post thumbnails. So this probably is going to need a refactor as well. It's a little bit messy here, but we will get there. Okay, so now I have this listener, and I can check that that's working by logging the search term and a list of posts. So I should have the correct search term and a valid list of posts. We go, test, and the 8 objects. Now if we run this very simple filter and try that again, let's try chuck lowercase. So term is not defined. Why is that? Index.js line 9. Okay, I call it search term instead. There we go. And let's log the result here. Okay, so chuck lowercase, 0 results. Chuck uppercase, 1 result. So we know already that we have an issue. It's not important to us that we honor uppercase or lowercase. So these are the sorts of issues that you start to encounter immediately with search behavior, and it's why a one-liner like this is probably not going to meet your needs. It's going to be too simplistic. So I'm going to break this function open a little bit, create some space for myself to think and work and decide how I'm going to assess this. So maybe we want to get the title, post.title, and make that lowercase. And we can do the same with the search term. So term equals search term to lowercase. And we can return title includes term. So just to go over what's happening inside this filter function, in fact, I'll rewrite that quickly to make it a bit more obvious. So this is just a different syntax for the same thing, using the more traditional function syntax. So here we have our list of posts, and then for every individual post, so this is looping over the posts, for every individual post, we're lowercasing the title, we're lowercasing the term, or we could do that outside the loop, we could do that up here even. And we are returning true or false. So this includes a method will only ever return true or false. Does this string contain this string? And so if we have a match, then we want to include the matching post in this array here. If we don't have a match, we want to exclude the non-matching post from the array here. So if we try that out, and we try chuck, now we have our one match. It's no longer case sensitive. We can try again, maybe change this to Norris, and we get the same result. So if you just want to search on the title, that is probably enough, but you might be missing out on a potential match with the body content, with the tags, with the username. So we have cookie here. Oh no, cookie's in the title. I need something that's not in the title. So not, for example, if I search not, even though we can read it in the content there, it's not going to produce a result because we're not looking at this content at all. So in order to change that, we would need to sort of replicate this for the body content. And then now we have two things to consider. So we have maybe it's going to match the title, or maybe it's going to match the body. If it matches either, it will be included. If it matches neither, it will be excluded. So let's try that. We have not one result. We also have tags, author. I think those are really the only relevant fields that we could continue searching with, and they're both a little bit different. So tags is an array, and if we go to MDN and we search string includes, and then we go to MDN and we search array includes, even though these two functions use the same word, they are, no, that's string. So they have the same name, these two methods. They're both called includes. They both return true or false. And it's very easy to think that they do the exact same thing, but they don't. With a string, you're looking for this string inside this string. With array includes, you're looking for a whole item inside the array. So there's a situation where if you have black cat, well, let's type this out. So if you had the string black cat and you were searching for, so this is an array, let's say tags, and we're going to say white cat. Okay, so we want to search the term cat in tags. If we say tags.includes cat, the answer is false, because there would have to be an item exactly matching that. So when it comes to filtering an array, it's a little bit different. You have to either accept that you're not going to have such a close match, and you're going to have to search for an exact tag value, or we need to get more sophisticated with how we're actually looking at these tags, which is what we're going to do. So, tags. We need to do the same thing that we're doing here. We need to lowercase them, and we need to then look at each tag individually, and we need to decide whether this tag matches our search term or not. So there is a name for this process where you start off with a big list, and one by one you eliminate an item. It either matches or it doesn't match until you have a smaller list. It's a filter. So we need to filter inside our filter, and this is where things start to get kind of complicated, and it's easy to get mixed up when you've got all of these closures here. So if I get rid of this console log, you're going to have a lot of this kind of thing, and it's very, very easy to trip over stray closing brackets and whatnot in the process of doing this. So we're going to continue as we are, and then in the process of refactoring, I think that you will see how we can make this more manageable and easier to read for everyone. So the first thing I'm going to do is post.tags. I'm going to map those tags, and for each tag I'm going to lowercase. Forgot an equal sign there, so that's the first step here. We're going to sanitize them in the same way that we're sanitizing the title and the body, just to make sure that we're not accidentally doing a case-sensitive comparison. And then for each of these items, we need to, it is for each of the items. We're going to look at each item, and we're going to do the same thing that we're doing here. We're going to ask, this is a tag, not a post. Sorry, that would have gone badly. So for each tag we have here, we're going to ask, does this tag include the search term, which is called term. So in theory here, only tags that match the search term, or that the search term appears within that tag, only those are going to be left in this list. And all we care about is there at least one item in this list? So let's create an example, post tags A, B, C. If we have the search term A, obviously this post is a match because there's a tag called A. We don't care where this tag is, or we don't care how many other tags there are. We don't care whether more than one tag matched. We don't care if the post title, the post body, and the post tag matched. We just want to know that at some point a match occurred somewhere. So when it comes to this array, we can do this in a sort of sneaky way where we have this array, post tags, we map it to sanitize it, we then filter it. So what are we going to be left with? An array, a small array, probably with only one item or 0 items. So the length of that array is quite important. And since we only care whether it's 0 or more than 1, we can treat this whole thing like a yes or no. So this is some fairly nasty code to look at, but it's very nice code in terms of how it's treating data. So this is a very efficient way to look at an array and to compress it into a true or false. It may help you to go through this process with more syntax so that you have a better understanding of exactly what's happening here. So I'm going to break this down. We have our list. Then we are sanitizing the list. I don't think that's very important. Once we've sanitized, we are looping through each tag, and we are checking if that tag includes the search term. So we're going to end up with something like this, tags equals, and there's going to be a matching tag in here, and that'll be it. There won't be any other tags. What we want to know is this array empty or is it not empty? So if we create no tags and it's empty, the main difference between these two is that no tags has a length of 0, tags has a length of not 0. We don't care that this is 1. We care that it's not 0. It doesn't matter if it's 15 or 20 or 3,000. It just can't be 0, otherwise we're not dealing with a matching tag scenario. Right, so if that's if we have the length here, if we change these two examples, and we say that we should look at these as true or false, something equals true, equals false, equals false, equals true. This is truthiness and falsiness, which I think is covered in JS1. And what we're doing here is we are forcing, so this Boolean operator here, it's forcing us to look at a number as if it's a true or false. So we're forcing this decision here. And likewise, 3 is true, and 1,000 is true, and 10,000 is true. So all of these are fine. These are all matches. This is not a match. I appreciate this might be a little hard to understand, but that's what's going on when you filter stuff. And this is the way you think about an array, sort of a little bit mathematically, or you think about it in terms of like logic, where there are properties of the array. You don't have to think about the items of the array. Sometimes the items of the array aren't actually the most important thing. And in this case, what we want to know is tags match. So this is going to be true or false. Either the tags match or they don't. So with that, we can now update our expression here. And we're going to say if the title matches the term, or the body matches the term, or one of the tags matches the term, then that's a successful search, and we can check the filtered posts and run a bit of a test on here. So what are we looking for? We don't actually know what the tags are. Let's check out the API request to see what they're looking like. Cookies, there we go. So we should see at least one message relating to cookies because it has the tag of cookies. And in this case, we actually would have had 2 hits. So at this point here, this whole expression up to length, that would be 2 in this situation, because there are 2 tags that match our search term. But it doesn't matter that there's 2 because we only want a true or false answer here. So just to sort of show you what all of this boils down to, it is just going to be a pretty simple number, usually 1 or 2 or 0. Okay, so we've got a reasonably good search behavior here. We could also search the author name. That's going to be quite straightforward because it's going to be more like one of these statements here. So we're going to have author and post author name to lowercase, and we can say if the author includes the term, then include that as well. And we can test that out by looking for cookie monster. And we've got 3 results, and they all seem to have the same author, which is Cookie Monster. So it's easy to include things in your behavior, especially in this way. Like this is not too hard to understand. Working with the arrays is a little bit more tricky, but really you're doing the same thing. You're just nesting another layer of filtering inside your filter. If you do too much in here, So if you've got lots and lots of code, like 50 lines of code or what have you in here, it might be that you're doing too much work. Like a filter function is supposed to be quite quick to resolve. Because especially if we're going to be changing it so that like every time you type, that filter is going to run. I'm typing quite quickly here. I need that filter to be running at the same speed I'm running. So there is a little bit of a risk that too much work goes in here and things start to get slow. So just bear that in mind when you're producing this. I think generally speaking, a simpler search behavior is better because the more complicated it gets, the harder it is for other people to understand and like guess about. So if you're a user coming to the site and you don't know that like tags is the most important thing to search for, you might not be getting the results that you expect if there's a very customized search behavior, for example. All right, so we've got this. I'm going to set. I'm going to set a little checkpoint here in Git. So this is basic search behavior with no rendering. So we have, I don't know if it's clear or if you can see this obviously on my screen, but this variable here is kind of grayed out, or it's like doesn't have the same color as this one, let me put it that way. And that's because I haven't referred to it. So if I haven't referred to a variable, I can't really expect anything to happen with that variable. Like I'm not going to expect it to show up on the screen if I haven't used the data somehow. So that's the next thing to do, is use the data. I have this sort of procedure here for rendering thumbnails, but I want to reuse this. So instead of copying that code over here and changing this to that and calling it a day, I'm going to do a bit of refactoring here, and I'm going to show my process of quickly doing a common sense refactor. This whole file needs refactoring because I was doing all my work in one file, because it can help to start off with that in that way. So the first thing I want to do is take those 3 lines, and I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call this render post thumbnails. I'm going to take a list of posts, and then we are going to do that, make that code. We also need a container because we have these 2 lines here, container.clear. And if you were listening at the very start of the session, I explained what this container.clear code is. It's basically the same thing as inner HTML equals an empty string, but it's a bit more safe to use. So now we have this function here. We can replace this, and we can add the arguments, posts, and we want to pass in our container. Here for the errors, I could refactor that even, like I could say function render posts thumbnail error, and it's going to be more or less the same thing, except we've got a message this time. So that's going to be message. And we're going to have a type, which is the visual appearance of the alert, the Bootstrap alert. Now we can use this function with our message and our type, and we can, get rid of those lines that we've just replaced, and we can do the same thing here. with this message and this type here. So this is an in-place refactor. I'm not changing the way anything works here. The code is exactly the same. All I've done is I've created a function that is helpful to me. 1 second, I'm just going to check this dog. I don't know if you can hear that. Arlo, what's up? What's up? Come on. Okay, all good. So all I'm doing here is just reorganizing my workspace a little bit to tell a better story here, to repeat myself less, to make things a little bit more standardized. And then what I would do from here, if I fold all of these up, I might choose to put these in a different file. I'm going to leave them for now because I think I'm probably going to add stuff to this before I'm done. But what I'm interested in is this render post thumbnails function that we created, because that's the same thing in here. That's what we need to do with these filtered posts. We need to perform this function with our list of filtered posts. So that means we have to import it from, in fact, we can't import it because it's not exported. So I have to export this, and I'll export this as well. And I might as well export this, and I might as well export this, because it doesn't really hurt me at this stage to have all these exported and available inside the app. So I'm going to liberate them all. And if I go back to the file I was supposed to be working on, sometimes you get a quick and free import by just typing out the name of the function. And you can see here there's a suggestion, or there's 2 suggestions. If I accept one of those, it's going to attempt to get the right file for me. Okay, so filtered posts, and there's one more thing missing. We need a container. So I'm just going to do what I did before, and I'm going to pass the responsibility for this container. I've made it into an argument so that I can forget what I'm looking for. Here we go. No, I'm looking for the sidebar. Here we go. So in the same way that I'm passing the posts in, I'm also going to pass that container in, just so that there's one place where this is getting decided. I know that it's going to be rendering the search output in the same place as it's going to be rendering the list of all items. Okay, container, and then we can add that in there as an argument in the render function. And with a bit of luck, we should have a working search bar. That's nice. Nice that there's no error. And we can look for cookie and maybe try and okay, so they're all of them are going to return if I search for message, because they all have the tag of message. Okay, so that is that's a reasonably reliable, quite straightforward, and quite comprehensive search function, but there's still a lot to go through. I think I'm gonna pause the session for a break. I think we're going to do 10 minutes. So I'm looking at the clock, let's say 20 past 2. We'll reconvene and we can look at running this search function directly from the input. So instead of using the search button, we can get rid of this button and we can listen in for an event that's going to occur when the user is typing. We can re-render this list as the user is typing, and then we can start to look at the performance impact that can have and the ways that we can get around that performance impact using tools like debouncing. This is a bit of code that I do not know off the top of my head, i.e. I can't just write this out based on memory. I have to look this up because it's a little bit complicated and you are not required to understand the full workings of this. But this is something that I'm going to be using, and I need to grab it and put it in my project. In here, I'm going to call this, in fact, I'm going to add that as a tool rather than a part of the search. So we're going to say tools, search, debounce is what we're going to call that. And I will explain the full concept behind this when we have our example, but that's now secreted away. One of the best parts of development is not writing new code necessarily as much as deleting old code. So we have reached a point where this search bar is as good as it can be with this setup. So with this button setup where we're waiting for the user to make their search and then we are showing them the results. In this case, we have 0 results. It is good manners and it's good UX to show the user that their search term didn't match any items. It's not that there are no items available, because if we search message, we can see that we have many items available. But if we search for something random, then we need to see some sort of alert here. And I do have a system for showing alerts. I have this template here, alert message, that I showed at the beginning of the session. It has a very simple template using the alert class, and you can change the color using the type argument. And this is a simple example of how a class can be useful for representing HTML bearing data, I suppose is the best way to put it. So we're going to use this alert, and we also refactored this error function. So we can actually use this function to show that there were no results in the search page. So if we look at what we're doing here, this is the point where we're generating our list of filtered posts. So before we attempt to render, because this could be an empty array. So before we attempt to do that, we can say if filtered posts.length. So what we're really saying is if filtered posts.length is greater than 0, then we want to show the thumbnails. And if there are no results, then we want to render post thumbnail error. Not necessarily the best name function in the world, but that's what we've got. And here we are warning the user. So we have 2 arguments here, message and type. The message is that there are no messages that match your search term. And the type, it could be danger, it could be warning, info, success. I think out of those, danger might be a little bit too strong. I wouldn't say that the user is really in danger. And it's not really info because they have asked for something and what they've asked for is not available. So in this case, I think warning is going to be fine. Let's just check that okay, we haven't used one of those yet. Okay, so if there's no items in this filtered array, then we're going to show the alert. Otherwise, we'll show the correct list. So let's try that out. Got an error, container is not defined. So let's check where we, so that's coming from line 32 of inbox.js, which is this file here, 32. Right, so this function also needs a container. So we're going to add that in as an argument and add that in there, I suppose. Okay, and then we have to do the same thing for our search function, add the container at the end there, otherwise it doesn't know where to place this error message. And let's try that again. There we go. If I try Chuck, I get Chuck, otherwise I get an error or a warning. Sometimes you will want to show all items. So it might be that instead of showing a warning, you choose to show all of the items here. So that would be very easy to demonstrate here, because we're just going to pretty much copy this, except we're not going to show the filtered posts. We're going to show the original list of posts that we got at the beginning. So now I can search for something and I'm pressing the button. Nothing's changing because nothing is matching, and as a result I'm seeing all of the items. So those are two different approaches. I prefer to be more explicit with the user. So the user has been explicit with me. They really want to search for messages that contain this string. I'm explicit with them. There are no messages that contain that string. You need to try something else. It can be disorienting or confusing or frustrating to keep trying something over and over again and not understand why you aren't getting a different result. And it's best to be very, very upfront with the user in a way that they're going to understand by giving them a message in plain English. Okay, so that's a good commit point because I've added a null set case. So null set, if we do some computer science theory, set 1, 2, 3. If I can type properly here, there we go. So that is a set. It contains 1, 2, 3. And then null set is going to be an empty list. So this is a situation where we want to treat the null set quite differently to how we want to treat any other given set. If we have a long set or if we have a set with one item, we're going to treat those exactly the same. But as soon as there's 0 items and we have a null set on our hands, then we are going to show that message. This is a very, very, very common principle in computer science and programming of all kinds. What do you do when your array is empty? Do you do anything, or do you do something special? So with that caveat, we have catered for the search null set case, which is a very technical way of saying we're showing a warning message. Right, so next up we're going to go to HTML, and we're going to remove that button. So I need to remove this here, and I'm going to change the styles a little bit because I had to change those styles to incorporate the button in the first place. So now we've got the search bar taking up the full width. The problem here is that a button is designed to symbolize or represent a decision that the user has made. So a submit button in a form represents a user's confidence that they have completed the form with all of the adequate information and they want to proceed. In the case of like a driver's license application, it makes sense to have a button once you're ready because there's going to be like 15, 20 different fields for you to fill out, and you have to make sure that all of those fields are validated correctly and you've got the right data in each of those fields before you continue with the form. But in the case of a search form, we only have this single input and we only have the single data point, which is the search term we're typing in. So there is less of a necessity to defer the search action until the user presses the button because there's no other inputs that they can fiddle with in the meantime that would make it important to sort of wait until they're finished typing before searching. So we have an opportunity when it comes to a search bar to do live typing or live searching. And this is something that can be set up quite easily and takes a little bit of experience to get working nicely. So what we're going to do is, I think I'm just going to keep working on the same file, but I will refactor it. So we need to introduce a different listener here because we've removed the button. The button was what we were using to click in order to generate the event. We can still generate the event by using the enter key. So I can still search in the same way without the button just by hitting enter. And that I haven't written any code for that. I haven't done anything special to enable that. The only thing I've done to make sure that you can hit enter to search is that I've used a form tag and I've used an input tag. That's all you need. A lot of UX can be had for free by understanding HTML in depth. A lot of people think they understand HTML. A lot of people who are professional developers think they understand HTML, and often they don't have a deep understanding of HTML. This is a great example where such an understanding can actually save you a lot of time writing JavaScript because form handling, form behavior is very old in the field of web development. It is the backbone of user interaction. So it is something that has had countless tens or hundreds of thousands of hours worth of developer attention over decades or a decade. So the system has been very well tested and thought out and extended, and it works really nicely. So you may as well use these things for free instead of like writing an event listener that's going to listen for the enter key to be pressed. That's a lot of work. So in terms of the user experience, it's not good enough to assume that they know that hitting the enter key is going to be enough. It is polite to provide a button as well, but what we're going to do is we're going to listen. We're not going to listen for the submit event alone. We're going to listen to the submit event and we're going to listen to another event, and that's going to be us, the event generated by typing here. So the first thing is that maybe we don't want to listen to the search form, or maybe we do. So I'm going to set up a new function here. So we're going to call this setup live search. And I'm going to use the same argument signature there. Except here, if we look at the difference, the first thing we're doing is getting the form. This is a very common approach to get the input instead of the form. And in this case, it is search input. So it's input with the ID of search input. We could just write it like that, but that just makes it a little extra tight in terms of we know that this is always going to be an input element. If we accidentally use a div with the same name, it's not going to work. So in this case, being specific is good. And we could listen to the change event. We could listen to keyup. We could listen to the input element or the input event. So look at these one by one. They're subtly different. So they are going to have different uses in different circumstances, and I have a preference when it comes to searching here. So where do we want to take this? We want to set up the live search at the same time as we are setting up the regular search so we can test. And I can't think where in here. There we go. So we're going to put it here with the same arguments. And now, that's interesting. Why do I have an error? Oh, okay, there's an error in this function because I haven't imported it. So sometimes like this is such a good, this is a good little debugging micro lesson. I see an error here. I don't see an error here. No error in the console, but there is an error in HTML. The only way that can happen is if you are inside a try block. Because what's happening is this catch is catching an error here. So it's not actually catching an API error at all, which is what it's sort of intended to do. It's catching a syntax error, a mistake I have made in my code. And it's treating that error in the same way it would treat the API error. So this is something to be wary of when you're using try catch. Sometimes you can catch an error that you should really be not catching. I could move this code elsewhere. So for example, I could put it outside of the try catch. But in this case, I know what the error is being caused by. It's being caused by a lack of an import. And now the error goes away. And if we start typing, hopefully, no, we're not going to get anything. So let's go back to the search file, take a look at what we're doing here, what we're doing wrong, make sure that this search input is actually working. Okay, that looks correct. So why? Okay, right. That's actually exactly what I wanted to demonstrate. It doesn't work how you think it's going to work. So we have a pre-existing idea of how a live type search bar should work because we all have used these things on the internet before. So if we look carefully at the console, it's only going to log when there's a change event. And this log is going to be our search function. So we can imagine the list getting filtered each time that this log appears in the console. So we type test. Nothing happens. So nothing's going to be searched. Hello? Is it working? It's not issuing anything until we change focus. That's not good behavior. That's annoying behavior. Because if I've typed annoying, I want to search messages for annoying. I don't want to have to click on something else before that is going to kick in. So this one, the problem with it is that it is not happening frequently enough. It is updating too infrequently. only when I change the focus, which is not a natural behavior for the user. And also, let's try that again. So I had some text in here. I'm going to change the focus. We get a change event. Now I'm going to delete, or let's even use this reset. No change event until we change focus. So this is not good enough. This event is not intended for live typing. It is intended for checkboxes and radio boxes and that sort of thing, where the user is making a definitive action rather than making an input. So let's try the second one, key up. So key up, key of your keyboard, up as in going up. So you pressing the key down to begin with when you're typing, and then at the point where you're lifting your finger off the keyboard spring is returning the keyboard key to the up position. So if I start typing, I should expect for each letter to be one event. So this one is definitely not like the previous event. It's happening too often, if anything. It's definitely giving us the rich level of detail we want, but there's a few things that are missing. So if I type in 1, 2, 3, we have 3 events. And if I clear this, we still have 3 events. I can change focus. We still have 3 events. It hasn't reset. It hasn't understood that this has been changed. So if we had a search filter available at this point, it would not have updated. So it's better, but it's still not what we want here. What we want is the third example, which is the input event. The input event happens anytime new input is made to this element. And that's of all kinds. So we can type. Those are all input events. We can clear. That is an input event. We can copy and paste. That is an input event. So this covers all of our possible cases. It covers every input type, and it's going to give us the best coverage in terms of like when that list should be updated. So let us compare. In fact, before we go on, so I'm going to delete these two because they're no good and we don't like them. We're happy with input as our event here. What I'm going to do is show you that it doesn't have to be the specific search input that you're listening for. So I'm going to comment out this search input, and we're going to change this listener to be the search form instead. So now when I'm typing, I'm getting the same level of output, even though I'm listening to an input event happening on the form, not an input event happening on the actual input itself. So why does that happen? It happens because HTML is a hierarchy with parents giving way to children, giving way to grandchildren, and finally to orphans, widows at the end. And when you click on something, so if I click on this label, the click event is going to originate here, then it's going to bounce up to this div, then it's going to bounce up to this form. then it's going to bounce up to this card, and then it's going to bounce up to the body, and then it will bounce up to the document or the window object. And you can actually set a listener on the window, and you can listen for anything. So I can say any input event anywhere is going to give me this console log now, even though I haven't specifically set listeners for these individual elements. I've set one for the global, the whole universe, the window. And the only reason the only way that can happen is because events travel upwards through the hierarchy. So we can listen to events on the parent element. We don't have to be so specific that we're listening to the specific input. Why have I changed it like this? Why can't I just leave it as the search input? Well, it's because here we want to run this on submit, and we want to run it on input. We want this. So we need to take all of this code and refactor that so that we can put it in here. So let's do that. I can make this very simple for myself. I'm going to use Command X or Control X to cut, and I'm cutting the whole function, and I'm going to just paste that and give it a name. So we're going to call this search. I think that is a perfectly fine, or on search, because event listeners, it's nice to say on, because it's gives us an idea of like when that event is going to happen. On click, on search, on submit. It's just a sort of syntactic convention there, but we're keeping the code exactly how it was. We're not changing a single line of that. All we've done is we've named that function so that we can use it twice, once for the input event and once for the submit event. This means that we can delete this function because we no longer need it. This means that we can remove this, and it means we can remove this. And we should have, okay, no, we have an error on line 14 here where we are not finding, okay, we're not finding the form. So if when I was cutting, I didn't really check. I think it should have the form because that's the event target still. Let's just check that. So the error says that it can't find the input. So I'm just going to check what this form variable is actually representing. It's representing an input. That is probably, so the way to look at this is to log the actual event and take a closer look at the event object. And we can see that the target here is actually the search input, not the form, which is, it makes sense. So the form's in here, but that's a little bit irritating to get it out from there. Okay, well, what we can do we need on search? So one quick way to fix this issue, where I have I'm getting a form here and I'm getting an event here, which is a problem for me. So I could change this so that we just have the value coming through. So everything below here. No, that's not great either. All right, so you know what? I'm going to not try and listen to both of them. So I'm going to get rid of the first, the submit listener, and I'm going to simplify it instead of making this more complicated. This means that this is going to be picking up the input, and all of this work is being done to find the input in the first place. So we can we can get rid of this, and this search term instead is going to be event.target, because that is our new target. And I think we're probably fine with the rest of that. Post is not defined at line 15, which is because we are no longer inside this scope. The easiest way to do that is to move our function inside the scope, like put it inside the function. We're only going to use this search event inside this context anyway. If we wanted this to be reusable, we would be better off adding an argument, but in this case we can just nest them like that, and there we go. We are now got a working search. If we make a mistake, we get an error. Okay, so that is the simple live type setup. If you're going for this and you don't want to go through the previous steps, you might want to just build for this from the first place, i.e. not doing all that stuff with the form element that I was doing just now. But let's look at what the problems are with this. So it's quite nice in this situation because I only have like 10 or so items. So when I'm searching, it's going to be really quick. It's going to be really responsive because my data set is small and it takes a very small amount of time to check each one of these posts. If I change things and I go into my API code and I remove this here, so this is adding a tag filter. If I look at the network, so we now have an error. Why do we have an error there? So this is another case where the error handler is suppressing a useful error. So I don't know what that error is. It is happening. Let's log that. Cannot read properties of null, reading length. Okay, I think I know what that is. It's not really relevant to the session. So I'm just going to quickly fix that. It is this thing that is failing. This is a very quick fix. I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to continue on rather than fixing this in a, if this, there we go. Okay, so what I've just done, apart from fixing an unrelated bug, is I removed the filter. So I'm now looking at the full 100 posts that you get if you don't filter your request. And now if I start typing, is that working? It's lowercase. So I seem to have an error there as well. So the errors are happening when there's no post body. So what we can do, I think I can add a default body here. So I could just say like that, I think. Nope, don't think that's working. So that's happening in filtered posts, which is here. So what I can do here is say if post.body so that means it's going to be like false or a string. I don't really like that, so let's do this. I'm setting a default value. There we go. Right. So now I've got 100 items instead of 10 items. At this point, you might start to see performance impacts. So it could be that 100 items is still too few, maybe 200 items, you'll start to feel the impact of this. But when you're repeating, so every time you search, you have to run through every single post and every single post's tags every time. So if we think about that in terms of numbers, we've got 100 posts. Let's say each post has 3 tags. We have to run over 100 posts one at a time. For each of those posts, we have to check 3 tags. So it's going to be 100 plus 100 times 3. There's going to be 400 operations each time we type a letter. If we're dealing with 1,000 posts instead of 100 posts, that's 4,000, 4n. These numbers get big really quickly. So there is a long-term learning that you will have over years, not over the course of this study. Over years of your career, you'll get a feel for the limitations of the browser, the limitations of the power that each computer has or doesn't have. And there are certain ways to be courteous to the user to make sure that you're not abusing their hardware, i.e. you're not forcing their browser to make many unnecessary calculations just for the purposes of like a sort of incremental improvement to how the app looks and feels. So what do we do about this? Does it matter? In the context of your projects, probably not. It probably does not matter for you at this stage because we are still dealing with quite lightweight applications and there is a limit of 100 posts per request. It's very easy to get around that limitation. So to do that, we would spool requests in the background. So whilst the search is ongoing, we could fetch and add more and more post objects to the array that we're searching. And doing that, you can quickly get into the thousands, if not the tens of thousands. And I can guarantee you at the point where you have 10,000 post objects in memory, and then you're trying to loop through every single one and check multiple fields, it's going to start to slow down the application. So I want to re-enable that, the console log. So I'm going to say just spam. So I want this to be generating spam every time I'm making a search here, counting the amount of spam that I'm generating in the console there. The issue in terms of performance here is time. This function wants to update immediately. It doesn't actually need to update immediately because the user's eye can't traverse the differences so quickly. It takes your eye a couple of milliseconds to see when a list is changed or when a page is updated. And we're not like, as you're searching, you have a rough idea of what's in that list, just naturally from your peripheral vision. But it's not happening like super instantaneously. There is an opportunity to slow things down, to create delay. And the benefit of creating delay is that you are still providing work for the user, so you're still searching for the user. But if you set your delay quite short, like maybe 100 milliseconds or 200 milliseconds, then it still feels like everything is updating live as you're typing. But the reality is that the browser is skipping maybe 50, maybe 100 of these spam requests. So you can see they're filling up quite quickly in that console bar now. I'm typing, and we might want to skip like roughly every 10th or every 20th request because the user's not going to feel that. The user's not going to be disappointed that they only had 50 opportunities to search a data set instead of 500, as long as they still get their data and it still feels like the application is performing responsively or quickly. There are many libraries for debouncing. So the one that I'm most familiar with professionally is called RxJS. It's also available in Lodash. So I'll just, for the sake of fairness, Lodash has an implementation of Debounce as well. These are third-party JavaScript libraries. This can be done simply without using a library because the principle is actually quite simple. So if we go back to this code here, this is what we're going to use to debounce this request. So the purpose of this function is to delay something just by a little bit. And so if we take a close look here, the two arguments for this function is a callback function that's going to run after the delay, and we have the delay period. This is the ID of the timeout, which we need that to be able to remove the, like, if we're creating timeouts, we're creating event listeners, we're creating intervals, these kinds of things, they are registered on the browser with an ID, and if we want to remove them, we have to know what that ID is. So if you're creating something like this, it's a good idea to remove it after you're done with it, and this ID is just the piece of data we need to remove it. We're going to test this out, see if it works. I've already moved it into the project, so we have it available here. And what we can do is we can use this to intercept. So we're going to, let's see. So he's using, right. So you use it at the point where you would normally just have an event listener. So that code I've highlighted there, that's just a normal event listener in the same way that on search is an event listener because it has the event property or the event argument. That's also an event argument. So what we're going to do to test this out is we need to debounce this on search. So here we debounce on search. Is that right? Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. But we need the time as well. So they've set 250 milliseconds. I'm going to set something quite long for now. So I'm going to set 1 second just for the purpose of testing. And then we need this debounce method to be imported. So that's just the quick way I use to leverage VS Code to import something for me. And now if we check this out, I haven't tested this, so it might not work. It looks like it's not doing anything. Oh, there we go. It looks like it's not doing anything because it's doing its job. So let's try that again, refresh, and let's type hello. And we see after 1 second of debouncing time, our request goes through. So I could say test, 1 second passes, and we get our results. The important thing about this is not that it adds a delay. So if we reduce this now to 250, quarter of a second, what this is doing is it's giving some time for the user to finish typing. So when we're typing, we usually have a full word or a full term in our mind. So elephant takes me a second to type, but I don't like. That's just the start of the word, right? It takes me 2 seconds to type that, or 2 milliseconds, but the rest of the word is going to take a second to type out. So this delay is meant to like give the user a little bit of time to get their what they're trying to express down on paper. And it also blocks progress. So if I'm typing like that, during that delay process, I can't keep spamming. You see how there's nothing appearing in that spam, the spam counter on the right-hand side until I stop typing. So this is much more efficient in terms of memory. It's using fewer resources, but it's still pretty live. Maybe we can make this shorter. Maybe we can go to 150 milliseconds to make it feel a bit more responsive. So that's a very simple debounce. And I think the last thing in terms of like user experience to talk about is going to be setting a minimum. So I did actually add that to the HTML. There's a min length of 3 characters. So it would probably be a good idea to do the same thing here. So we could say that if the search term length is less than 4, I suppose, then return. Don't continue with the search operation. And now I can start typing, and I can say A. Okay, let's try it again. A. Sorry, I need to move my console log down to the bottom here, otherwise it won't be giving me the right information. A, B, C, D. So now it's only going to start searching after that 4th character. there should probably be a case for when this search input is blank. So right now I've searched for tests. Now I backspace, but I still have the tests. Do I? Is that? If I refresh, I am a fish is first. Then I search tests. Now have a nice day is first, and then I delete that content, and have a nice day is still first, indicating that the test filter is still active. So in the same way that we have a null set case for when the array of results is null, we also need a null set case for when this search term is null. So that's going to be, we saw earlier how we could render the full list if there was a null set here. So we can do something similar. We can say if search term or if term length is 0, or if there's no length is a better way to put it, then we can show all of the posts. We can reset. And I'm just going to nest this because we only want one or the other to happen in this case. Okay, so that's our test set. And now when I backspace, it's not going to trigger because that is under 4. So I'm actually going to undo what I did there and reorganize. I like this code, but it's not in the right place. And we can change that just to make it a bit more obvious. So if the search term length is, if there's no search term, we should be showing the full list. And if there is a search term, then actually if we add a return here, like this one as well, it stops the function from running. So it's like an early exit, which in this case is good. So test set, null set, test set, null set. Right, I think that is all of the kind of UX-y stuff that I was planning to do. I am going to show, I'll do the populate on this, and then I'll tie it all together, and I think we will call that a day. So the remaining work is really to, well, there's a lot of refactoring that can happen here. Like this, I've tried to do this in an evolutionary way, but if I was starting with the intention of debouncing and starting with the intention of having all of these more advanced behaviors, I might have approached it differently. So I could do a refactor here, but that's not necessarily the most exciting thing to watch. So I'm going to instead commit what I've got, and then we can switch gears a little bit and look at populating this select and managing that information. So this change I actually want to revert because that was really just for the purpose of demonstrating debounce a little bit better. Okay. And just to kind of clear the deck a little bit. clear out all those files that I've been working on and just think sort of from a little bit of an arm's length what needs to happen here. We have a select. That select is being created in HTML here. So at some point when we're generating this page, we need to select this item. We need to request the list of profiles from this endpoint here. And then for each one of the profiles, we need to render an option element. So I'm going to put that in its own UI file. And I'm going to say this is called profile select. And there's lots of different ways to do this. So we could have export class profile select like this, and use it in a way where we sort of say like select equals get a select from a document, and then maybe we want to new profile select and add the select in there like that. I'm going to keep it a bit more simple than that because I want to show the core of what's going on rather than getting too wrapped up in the presentation. So we are going to have a function called setup profile select. The first job of this function is to grab the select. So this is called, does it have a special name? It's called recipient. So select with the ID of recipient. And we're going to want to add an event listener. So in the same way that we had to make a choice for the type of event we wanted to listen to here, we have to make a choice about the type of event we want to listen to here. Since this is a select rather than a free text field, I think that change is actually going to be fine. We can see, let's just test that out actually. See how often that runs, if it's going to be good enough. And then this is also, so this listener is going to be happening, it's going to be set on the inbox page as well. It's part of the main form body, and we have this this function already that is in charge of setting listeners for the form. So I think that is a good place to put this function. And we don't need to give it any arguments at this point, so we should be right. There's no options there for it to change to, so let's just add one of those. Okay, so I can tell that the change event is going to be fine here because we are getting the information at the right time. We're not in a situation where we're making a UI interaction and then not actually seeing the data result happen. So that means that the change event is a good fit for us here. And we can replace this with our onChange event. It's not actually what we're doing though. Like I'm not thinking about it. I'm not sure if that's going to be useful, but we can keep it there for a second because what we're actually doing is we want to populate this. So we want, instead of waiting for the user to select something, we want to be injecting options in here for the user to select. And then we already have a form handler. So We actually don't need this at all. It's a good way to show the difference, like when different events are needed in different situations, but I don't think we're going to need that listener. What we're doing instead is we're going to be awaiting something, get profiles, which doesn't exist right now. We're going to be calling the result of that profiles probably. So profiles equals await get profiles, and then we're going to do something for each. So for each profile, we're going to do something. We're going to create a new option. So first things first, we need this API function, and we already have posts, we already have auth, so I'm going to create a new folder called profiles and call this index.js. We know the name of our function already because I named it before. And if we take a look at one of these, we can probably use a lot of this code. So we have constants coming from another file, and that is going to have the URL we need. So these are all the little mini functions that I've got to generate the URLs. We need one for profile. So we need this path here, and that's pretty easy to provide in this way. We just need to add one of these called API profile, and that's going to be /profiles. And then we can say export const profiles. And this way of returning the new URL, this is something I like to do. You don't have to do the same thing. I like it because you can add query parameters really nicely to it. Like you can do it in a sort of procedural way. And this makes changing your API settings and your filters and whatnot pretty easy. But it's just a preference. So this is going to be profile. And that's our URL. Nope, that's the wrong file. This is the right file. Okay, so we're sending a fetch request to the URL we just created in another file. We're sending auth headers, and there's no body, so there's no content type to worry about. It's a normal fetch request, it's a normal get fetch request. All of this should be pretty much good to go. So we can save that, and we can undo whatever damage we did here. I'm just going to get rid of the changes there. And now we can hook it up. So in our file over here, this is now defined because we just defined it. And we can just test that, I suppose. See if it gives us a list of profiles. There's our list of profiles. So we need to create a new option element for each one of those profiles. So we could do it with in HTML, we could do it with DOM parser, but in this case we're only creating one element per item. So there's not really a very heavy templating workload we've got to worry about. So in this case, create element wins pretty much hands down. And we need to set the value, which let's think about that a little bit later. What is the value going to be? and we're going to set the text, and that's going to be the name, profile name, I suppose, and then the value could be profile email. That might not be helpful. We might want them both to be name. Yeah, I think we do want them to be both name, so that's fine. We'll leave it like that. And then once we've got our option, the last thing we need to do with our option is we need to append that option to the select. And now we have our nice list of lovely users. And if I select one of these at random and I create a message, let's check out the network tab for this one. Okay, so we had post success, and we have this message here. And if can we look at it closely? If we look at the tags, it has the tag of message, which is what makes it appear in the left-hand side there. And then it has this tag of @Victor, which is something that I would like to use. I would like to use it in a filter system maybe, so you can filter for only your own messages or only messages to your friends, only messages to people you're following, and so on and so forth. So that's that. That's how you set a select dynamically. This is how you manage events, search events, debouncing, and giving a little bit of consideration to the user's memory footprint in the process.